Laozi, the wise do not pretend to know. When the autumn breeze slowly seeps through the window frame, a face comes to mind. In a small alley on the outskirts of Seoul, under an old tin roof, there was an old man who sat quietly smoking. He was always in the same spot. On his lap lay a worn book, stained with time, and yet he never flipped its pages. He just sat still, and in that stillness, he seemed to transcend time and space, presence more than a person. As a child, I didn't understand why he was so quiet, why he never spoke. I thought he was mysterious, even frustrating. But strangely, being near him always brought peace, as if the noise of the world faded. Now, years later, I am slowly realizing that he was the embodiment of true wisdom. We live in an age of endless speech. People speak before they understand. They post before they reflect. Pretending to know often gets more attention than truly knowing. Perhaps that's why we've begun to despise or forget true knowledge and humble silence. The more knowledge fills the world, the more people speak, shout, and argue. Yet Laozi once said, "The wise do not pretend to know." That statement is not just a lesson in restraint. It is an attitude toward life, a lens through which to see the world, and a declaration of the most fundamental humility of human existence. Some say that in a competitive world, pretending to know is necessary for survival. But is that true? I ask, where did the sincerity that speaks without words go? Why is the quiet strength of showing through action overlooked? Does true power lie in words, or does it arise from the deep silence before words? I live in a city in the United States. Here too, social media never rests. Dozens of videos are uploaded every day. Thousands of comments flood in. Everyone shares their thoughts, their experiences, their answers. But real answers are hard to find. Often, someone's silence carries a stronger message than all those words. Laozi's words cut through time, like a blade, piercing the essence we need most now. Wisdom begins with knowing how much one doesn't know. Not pretending to know is not just about humility. It is a survival skill in our relationship with the world, and an inner strength that doesn't waver when facing oneself. As a child, I admired those who talked a lot, of classmates who raised their hands with the right answers, the seniors who presented flawlessly, the leaders who commanded with words. Meanwhile, quiet kids were often labeled passive or boring. But as I grew and started working with people, I realized that truly strong individuals are often the quiet ones, those who are careful with their words, not easily swayed, choosing to observe rather than display. They understood life more deeply, felt others more delicately, and knew themselves more clearly. The wise do not pretend to know may sound paradoxical at first. Most believe wise people are smart, eloquent, and full of answers. But true wisdom isn't flashy. It's a quiet presence, a stillness in one's expression, and truth that emanates through one's actions. Through this message, we begin to rediscover the wisdom of silence. It is not loud, it is quiet, deep, and lasting. It leads us closer to the essence of life, and in walking that path, we learn to become a presence that speaks more through silence than words. Are we ready now to listen instead of speak? Are we prepared not to pretend to know, but to become someone who truly understands. In the next part, we will explore the deeper meaning of this quote and how its philosophical echo manifests in life. Let us walk slowly now into the world of truths, quieter than words. Within this short sentence lie the countless boundaries we encounter throughout life, between speech and silence, knowledge and ignorance, humility and arrogance. At first glance, it may sound like simple advice. Live humbly. Don't show off. Let your actions speak. But the true power of this sentence lies in something much deeper and more essential. First, let us look at the phrase "the wise." Here, wisdom is not just the accumulation of information or knowledge. It is an integrated insight into the world, the self, and human relationships. A wise person is not merely smart, they see life differently. Their depth is unmatched. And above all, they do not easily express that perspective with words. They do not speak simply because they know, nor do they speak simply because they don't. If the purpose of speech is not to prove or boast, then there is no need to open one's mouth. Next, we consider the phrase "do not pretend to know." This pretending is another face of ignorance. We often act as if we know something when we don't, because appearing knowledgeable allows us, at least temporarily, to be recognized, respected, and influential. But that kind of influence is unstable. It is not rooted in truth, but in appearance. In the end, pretending betrays us. Laozi saw through this. He said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." These words are still repeated today for a simple reason. We still live in a time of too many words. Words overflow, but meaning is scarce. Words pour out, but sincerity is absent. Voices grow louder, but core values fade. And so people become weary, exhausted by the noise, frustrated by hollow words, struggling to find truth amidst the chaos. This phrase ultimately re-examines the relationship between wisdom and silence. Why does the wise person remain silent? Why do they choose to listen rather than speak? Because the wise know that words will eventually reveal who you are, and that the more important something is, the better. It is shown through actions rather than words, through life rather than explanation. Words hold power, but that power always comes with direction. Some words heal, some hurt, some clarify, some confuse. That's why the wise understand the weight of words. They know the destructive force that words can carry, and so they do not speak lightly. Even if they know something, if it may harm someone, if it has not yet ripened within them, they remain silent. Here lies an important turning point. Laozi is not simply telling us to be quiet. He is describing the balance between speech and action, knowledge and expression. Not pretending to know does not mean saying nothing. It means not wielding one's knowledge as a weapon, not using knowledge to prove oneself. For example, when someone is struggling, we often want to offer advice. We have experience. We think of solutions. We want to comfort them with words. But a truly wise person listens first. Before speaking, they feel the other's heart, read their face, and discern whether the person needs words, silence, or simply presence. That kind of sensitivity doesn't come from intellect, but from quietly cultivated intuition over a lifetime. Wisdom is, in the end, the ability to say less and understand more. And not pretending to know is the most beautiful expression of that wisdom. This phrase prompts us to ask ourselves, why am I speaking right now? Are these words truly necessary? Am I helping the other person? Or am I feeding my desire to be seen? Laozi's words are the ethics of silence, the philosophy of humility, the essence of wisdom. Etching this sentence into one's heart can change the posture of life itself. And those who practice it are not just people who speak less, but people who truly know themselves. Those who know themselves do not need to pretend, because they already know. Those who truly know do not need to speak of it. Their actions, attitudes, and presence say it all. Now, let us reflect on this quote once more and prepare to move into the next step. To make it a true life principle, we need to deeply understand how this idea took root in the philosophical and historical context of Laozi's time. Why did Laozi say this? What was his era like? What kind of worldview and life experience shaped his insight? In the next part, we will explore that together. The reason Laozi's words resonate even more deeply today is that the time in which he lived bears an essential resemblance to the chaos we face now. Around the 6th century BC, during the spring and autumn period, China was fragmented into countless warring states. Every day brought new battles, betrayals, plots, and shifting alliances. To survive, people talked more and more. The most persuasive voices gained power, and the loudest shouts seemed to lead the masses. In such a world, true meaning faded, and words became tools of power. Laozi looked that era square in the eye and said, "The wise do not pretend to know." This was not a mere command to be quiet. It was a philosophical diagnosis of a society diseased by empty rhetoric. He saw a world dominated by speech, where power was built through words, and a person's reputation rose and fell by the things they said. So he chose the opposite path. He said, "True wisdom exists before words." The philosophy of Laozi is centered on the concept of the Tao, or the way. The Tao is that which cannot be named, but is the origin of all things. He opens the Tao teaching with the line, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." In other words, once something is expressed in words, it is no longer the true Tao. For Laozi, essence always lies before speech. Words cannot contain essence. In fact, they may conceal it. Thus, the posture of not pretending to know arises from a reverence for the Tao. The Tao is too vast and too profound to claim as one's own. Anyone who declares they understand it has already moved away from it. That is why the wise remain silent. That is why they live it instead of explaining it. This is the way of Tao. We often confuse wisdom with the ability to explain. But for Laozi, wisdom is what cannot be explained, but is instead transmitted silently through actions, presence, stillness, and harmony. He sought a life of acceptance and flow. Instead of labeling things as right or wrong, he chose to follow the natural course. He chose action over argument, humility over assertion, silence over noise. Laozi's philosophy stands in stark contrast to that of Confucianism. Confucius emphasized order and ethics, which required clear doctrines, words, and teachings. Laozi, by contrast, saw such systems as artificial. He said, "The highest good is like water. Water does not speak, Yet it nourishes everything. It flows through the lowest places, seeks no competition, and eventually shapes even the hardest stone. This silent force, this influence born of non-assertion, was Laozi's ideal, and it continues to echo through time. Today, we once again live in a world overwhelmed by words. There is no shortage of information, but there is a drought of meaning. Knowledge overflows, but wisdom runs dry. In such times, Laozi's quiet sentence feels all the more powerful. The wise do not pretend to know is not an order to be silent. It is a call to return to what matters, to listen more than speak, to observe more than assert, to question more than answer. For Laozi, the Tao was always fluid and open-ended. It revealed itself not through exposure, but through quietness. The moment it was spoken, it disappeared, just as music's essence lies not in the notes, but in the rests between them. The essence of life lies not in the noise, but in the silence that holds it all together. Philosophy ultimately asks, how should we live? Laozi asks, uses a life spent proving oneself through words the true life? Or is the truer life the one where we walk our path silently and steadfastly? Which is stronger? Which endures longer? In the age of noise, those who resist with silence become the most deeply respected. We sometimes call such a person a hermit, not in the sense of hiding, but as someone who chooses silence over spectacle and listening over showing. The reason this philosophy still lives on in our lives today is this: no matter how loud the world becomes, what is truly important is still revealed in silence. Laozi's words are not relics of the past. They are a living guide. They stop us just before we post on social media, before we offer unsolicited advice, before we explain ourselves unnecessarily. They ask us, wait a moment, do I really need to speak now? We turn to see how this philosophy shows up not just in ancient texts, but in the lives of real people. Why does this sentence still breathe in the stories we encounter? Let us look through the lens of lived experience. He came to the library at the same time every day, in a quiet small town in the American Midwest. Inside a brick building long weathered by time, there was a man who entered each morning at 4 a.m., wearing a black wool hat pulled low. People called him Joe. No one knew whose father he was, or what job he once held. He simply sat by the window in a quiet corner of the library, read books all day, tidied up his seat, and quietly left. That was Joe. Then one day, the library's computer network went down due to a technical failure. The staff panicked. Students scrambled. Should we call a technician? Have we lost the data? Voices overlapped in concern. Joe silently stood up and walked into the server room. 15 minutes later, as if by magic, everything was restored. A startled employee asked, "How did you do that?" Joe just smiled. "I used to do this kind of work." That was all he said before quietly returning to his seat. Only then did people learn that Joe was a retired MIT computer engineer who had once collaborated with NASA. He held numerous patents and had authored many papers. He was a giant in his field, but he never told anyone. He didn't flaunt his past glory or seek recognition. He simply came to the library every day, read, quietly helped when needed, and returned to his seat. He existed through action, not words through attitude, not explanation. Someone once said, that man was truly wise. He didn't explain what he knew, but you just knew by being around him. There's a similar story from my childhood. In a small rural village in Korea, next door lived an old man who rarely spoke and rarely appeared at village gatherings. Whenever children lost their ball, it was always found hanging over his yard's fence, but no one dared speak to him. Yet every winter, gloves for the kids would appear quietly on their doorsteps. Overnight snow would be cleared from the yard by morning. Adults called him eccentric, but kids somehow liked him. One year, when a major flood threatened the village, people panicked and didn't know what to do. That old man calmly brought out a motor pump and sandbags from his shed. With composure, he changed the flow of water. Only then did the villagers find out he was a retired soldier, once the chief of a rescue team, with a history of saving countless lives. But he never explained himself or asserted anything. Instead, he quietly protected the safety of the village. Someone said, he was a strange man, but strangely, we trusted him. That strange trust, where does it come from? It comes from wisdom that appears before words, from truth that doesn't need to be spoken. Even in modern society, such individuals exist. A former Silicon Valley investment mogul once changed his name and began teaching coding to youth under a false identity. No one knew who he was. He would simply say, I'm just someone who's done a little of this before. But over time, people discovered that the algorithms he had created had transformed industries through various startups. Students and teachers came to admire him. Yet, he said, that was the past. What matters now are these kids. Just because I don't talk about it doesn't mean I don't know. Some things are better conveyed in silence. These examples deliver a powerful message: the trust that comes without speech, the presence that grows stronger by not pretending to know. These are the modern-day embodiments of the wise person Laozi described. They didn't say a word, yet everyone could feel they truly knew. And perhaps someone like this existed in your life, too. A teacher who watched over you quietly. A family member who stayed by your side without a word. A friend who simply reached out at just the right moment. Their presence, without words, was sometimes deeper. Even without speaking, they stayed with you longer. Even without explanation, they left a lasting place in your heart. This is the kind of presence we must become in this age. A person who understands the world through silence, moves others with their posture, and connects with wisdom, not just knowledge. A person whose silence deepens their being. These people, regardless of era or technology, are always respected. And remember, in the next section, we will explore how the messages of such people can be applied to our current society. Can the philosophy of silence still resonate in our world today? Let's dive deeper from the perspective of modern application. We live in the age of words. Words are power. Words are tools. Words are commodities. The moment we open our eyes in the morning, we are bombarded by the words of others on social media. We're swayed by the words of public figures through the news. In meetings, those who speak well are seen as the ones who matter. Words provide us with information, but they also exhaust us. They often lead to misunderstanding rather than trust, division rather than connection. The age of words has become the age of pretending, and each day, We are expected to pretend to know, pretend to be okay, pretend to have it all together. In this environment, the phrase, "the wise do not pretend to know," becomes more than a philosophy. It becomes a survival strategy and a core principle in relationships. In an era overflowing with information, a person who does not pretend becomes more unique, more powerful, more trusted. They are not just providers of information but of meaning, not just another voice in the noise, but a carrier of quiet resonance. Consider a workplace meeting where everyone is sharing their opinions. There's someone who doesn't speak, yet commands the room through attentive silence. Others look to them instinctively. When they do speak, the room quiets. Their silence wasn't absence, it was the result of deep thought. And that one sentence carries more weight than the dozens spoken by others, because they do not pretend to know, and they only speak when it matters. Now take social media. Everyone is an expert these days. People speak on dating, investing, parenting, even philosophy. So many perspectives are shared, but they often leave us drained. That's why people are now drawn to accounts that don't talk much, but show a consistent life. A father's silent hands preparing a lunchbox every morning. An elderly man cleaning a park at dawn. No words, just his quiet presence. These silent images tell deeper stories, embodying trust without noise. This principle also applies to our personal relationships. We are more comforted by friends who stay by our side in silence than those who give endless advice. A person who just sits beside you, says nothing, but stays, brings a peace no words can match. That's someone who carries the wisdom of not pretending. They build a relationship where silence itself speaks. Organizations, too, are shifting. The ideal leader was once the one who spoke the loudest and commanded with words. Now it's different. A leader who observes the atmosphere silently, who reads the flow before intervening, earns deeper respect. Servant leadership is trending leaders who remain behind the scenes, who step in only when needed. These are the leaders who embody Laozi's wisdom, who lead not with noise, but present. In education, the implications are profound. Classrooms shouldn't reward only those who pretend to know. They should be spaces where students can admit ignorance without shame, where curiosity is praised over certainty. Teachers shouldn't try to explain everything, but rather guide students to ask better questions and discover answers on their own. That's when students gain not just knowledge, but understanding and insight. That's wisdom. In the home, we often try to teach children with words, but children learn more from a parent's silence. When a parent refrains from gossip, when they lower their voice instead of shouting, when they show disappointment with their eyes rather than raised tone, as children feel it all. Silence delivers a message more powerful than words. This is parenting through wisdom, not pretense. Ultimately, this philosophy can be applied to all areas of life: relationships, work, education, social media, family, friendships, leadership. The power of not speaking creates ripples. It is not a form of retreat, it is focus, discipline, self-awareness, and respect for others. So now, we must ask ourselves again, how much do I practice the virtue of not speaking? How often can I say, I don't know? Do I listen before offering advice? Do I post on social media to pretend I know something, or to share real growth? And when I am silent, do my actions, choices, and presence speak on my behalf? These questions remind us that as words become louder, silence becomes more special. As pretense grows, humility shines more brightly. And in this era, Laozi's single sentence remains a powerful compass. The wise do not pretend to know. That sentence is no longer a quote. It is a living guide for us all. In the next part, we will explore how this philosophy can transform into deeply personal questions for the audience, questions that provoke reflection and inward growth. Every day, we live among countless pretenses, pretending to be okay, pretending to know, pretending to be strong, pretending to be calm. Sometimes, these masks protect us. We pretend so we don't seem too weak, too ignorant, too lonely. We decorate ourselves with words. But the longer we live that way, our true selves begin to fade in the fog, and we become trapped in the identity built by our speech. That's why we now must ask ourselves, why am I speaking like this? And when we can truly ask, is this word really necessary? We stand on the threshold of true wisdom. Now, I will ask you a few questions. You don't need to answer them out loud right now. Just thinking about them quietly is enough, because the deepest answers are always born in silence. First, what are the words you regret most? Words you gave as advice, but later realized were selfish. Words you said without understanding someone's pain. Words you exaggerated to seem impressive. Words that caused hurt you never intended. When we reflect on these, we realize it wasn't a lack of words that was the problem, it was that there were too many. Second, who is someone you truly respect? Think about it. Often, we're more drawn to someone who possesses quiet strength than to someone who speaks well, someone whose sincerity is felt without words, whose gravity is known without display. Isn't it likely that the person you respect most is someone who chooses silence over show, presence over proclamation? Third, when was a time you regretted not speaking? Staying silent isn't always wise. Sometimes, silence leaves room for misunderstanding. Sometimes it withholds comfort that should have been given. Silence and apathy are not the same. Not speaking is not about escaping responsibility, it's about knowing the weight of words. So now, we must seek the balance between not pretending and speaking when necessary. Fourth, what did your silence mean to someone? We influence others even without words. Just sitting beside someone, hugging them without explanation, smiling without commentary. That silence might have been the greatest comfort someone received. What memory of your silence remains in someone else's heart? Fifth, why do you pretend to know? This question is uncomfortable, but it needs honesty. Why do you speak as if you know when you don't? Is it about self-worth, fear, the desire for recognition? Why are we so desperate to prove ourselves? Is it really important to know something, or is it more important to accept ourselves as we are? Sixth, what silence can you practice today? Which words can go unspoken today? Which thoughts can be kept inside? Which emotions can be expressed with a gesture instead of a speech? Love can be shown in silence. Support can be given in silence. Leadership can be practiced in silence. What silent act will you choose today? Seventh, how often can you say, I don't know? When was the last time you nodded in agreement while actually not knowing something? When was the last time you honestly said, I don't know, I'll have to look into that. The courage to admit not knowing is the beginning of real wisdom. We must remember that. Eighth, how can you express silence? In what moments could silence lead to deeper understanding? When might your silence become a connection instead of distance, a kindness instead of avoidance, a form of listening instead of ignoring? If so, your silence becomes true power. Now is the time to find your own way of silent expression, your quiet language. These questions ask you not to answer with words, but with silence. That may sound strange, but Laozi said, "The wise do not pretend to know," which means the wise speak only what is necessary, and the wise know more within silence than they say with speech. And now, in accepting these questions, you are already standing on the edge of wisdom. In the next section, we'll begin transforming these insights into concrete habits and actionable strategies for your daily life. To create true change in life, philosophy must descend into practice. No matter how profound a realization may be, if it is not followed by action, it becomes nothing more than a fleeting phrase. The same goes for Laozi's words, "The wise do not pretend to know." If we fail to embody this in our daily lives, the words lose their power. So now, we must turn this philosophy into daily routines, habits of speech, and ways of being. The first strategy is training yourself to delay the impulse to speak. When in conversation or ask a question, we tend to respond almost automatically. Often, that response is based not on what we truly know, but on what we want to appear to know. In these moments, take a pause and ask yourself, do I really know this? Or is there a need for me to speak right now? This 3-second pause becomes more than a habit, it becomes a way of protecting your integrity. The second strategy is to practice saying, "I don't know" once a day. Many people are afraid of these words, but "I don't know" is a statement of humility, a sign of being open to learning, and an invitation for others to be honest too. It clears space for mutual growth. So today, try saying, "I'm not sure. I'll look into it," not as a weakness, but as maturity. The third is to conduct a speech detox online. Sharing information has its place, but sometimes it's necessary to step back. You don't always have to explain yourself. You don't always have to post. Time spent not displaying yourself is time spent rediscovering yourself. Try declaring one day a week as a no post, no share day. Silence isn't withdrawal, it's a journey inward. The fourth strategy is creating a listening journal. At least once a day, truly listen to someone. Then, write down a single sentence they said that stayed with you. This is not just note-taking, it's training your awareness as a listener rather than as a speaker. Over time, your words will lessen, your ears will grow sharper, and your presence will deepen. The fifth strategy is becoming comfortable with silence in conversations. Most people are afraid of pauses and fill them with unnecessary words. But silence is a space for thought. The next time someone asks you something, try replying, "Let me think about that," and allow a moment of reflection. That pause doesn't undermine trust, it builds it. It marks you as a thoughtful person. That's real leadership. The sixth is proving your presence through action, not words. Every day, do one thing to help someone without saying a word. Bring coffee to a busy coworker. Leave a short note for a tired family member. Let your actions be your voice. Words vanish, but quiet gestures remain. These silent practices make you a person remembered not for your speech, but for your impact. The seventh is building a silent morning routine. Start your day in stillness. Don't check your phone. Don't turn on the news. For at least 10 minutes, just sit and breathe. In that quiet, you meet yourself before you meet the world. That stillness sets the tone for the entire day, giving you clarity and grounding. The eighth strategy is replacing statements with questions. When you know something, resist the urge to explain it. Instead, ask others, "What's your take on this?" Doing so turns conversation into collaboration, not competition. A wise person is more curious about others' thoughts than eager to prove their own. The ninth strategy is remembering 3 sharp questions to minimize unnecessary words. Is what I am about to say truly necessary? Will this help someone? What would happen if I didn't say it? These questions weigh the value of your words. They help ensure your speech carries sincerity and strength. And finally, the 10th strategy is finding a community that honors silence. Surround yourself with people who value presence over performance, listening over loudness. In those relationships, you'll discover what it means to live a rich, quiet life. You'll learn that even without many words, you can be deeply known. Now, you may be feeling the power of not speaking, not as a void, but as a force. You've sensed that real wisdom is born outside of words, that real trust isn't built through speech, but through how you live. And next, in the final stage, we will gather all this into one lasting message on that brings together the quiet strength of wisdom and leaves behind a gentle, enduring light in your life. He didn't speak. He never did. After meetings, he quietly rose from his seat. At celebrations, he simply smiled. In moments of someone else's pain, he sat silently beside them. At first, people were uncomfortable. Why doesn't he say anything? What is he thinking? But as time passed, they began to understand him. He didn't need words, his presence spoke volumes. Without explanation, you could feel him. Without display, you could know him. His silence was not distance, but connection. Not apathy, but care. It was the quietest form of wisdom. We often meet such people in life without knowing it, without knowing why we feel drawn to them, why their wordless presence moves us. But memory remembers what they meant to us. The person who, in an important moment, gave us a warm gaze instead of a long speech, who offered silent patience instead of loud encouragement, who chose quiet companionship over noisy advice. That person was wise, not one who pretended to know, but one who never stopped learning. Not one who spoke, but one who expressed everything through presence. Laozi said, "The wise do not pretend to know." This means that those who do not flaunt their knowledge are the ones who truly understand themselves. Those who truly know do not need to prove it with words, because so often, speech is simply a desire to be acknowledged. But once that desire is set down, the truth becomes clearer. When you stop trying to show yourself, that's when you become most visible. Right now, what are your words like? Have you said too much? And what of your silence? Have you discarded it too lightly? We speak dozens of times a day. We think hundreds of times. We interpret others thousands of times. Amid all that, meaning is lost. Truth fades. And this quote asks us, In return, can we restore silence? Someday, someone may watch you sitting in silence and say, that person is different. That is the power of presence. Someone who is understood without speaking. Someone who is respected without pretending. Someone who moves hearts without decoration. If you can become such a person, that is the path of the wise. The fact that you've read this piece to the end means that the power of not speaking already exists within you. You already know that sometimes silence is the most powerful persuasion, that not speaking can be the deepest understanding, that looking into someone's eyes can be the greatest comfort. So let us now live like that, a person who shines without declaring it, who is trusted without explanation, who is admired not for what they say, but for who they are. That person stands quietly, watches quietly, and changes the world quietly. If you stand at the center of that silence, you no longer need to lean on words. You are already enough, deeper than words, warmer than silence. And that is the life. Laozi spoke of the life of the truly wise. Let us now see the world through silence. Even without words, you can be the person who influences others the most. And from today on, let's walk that quiet path together. Which line from this message stayed with you the longest? And in what moment do you think you'll remember this quote in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes, the quietest words leave the deepest echoes. Shall we share the power of silence together?